It is October, and that means it's time for a Halloween costume. Every October, I go all out on a Halloween costume because it's a great excuse to do a project I don't typically do. I just I don't have a reason to make many costumes. Halloween is that reason, that excuse. And some years I don't even go anywhere to wear the costume, but I enjoy doing something different. This year, I'm gonna be Eredin Bréacc Glas from The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now I've started that game. I've not finished that game. I've started. I know it's one of the greatest games of all times, but I started it. I saw Eredin. I'm like, man, that guy looks awesome because I think Halloween costume should be on a little scary side, and he definitely fits that bill. You know, this kind of skull helmet mask thing that's part crown. That's my favorite part of the costume. But the whole thing, you know, we've got this armor. I love making the armor. It's unfortunately I don't like the dude's like 7 or 8 feet tall. I mean, he looks absolutely huge, at least in the cutscenes. I'm not quite that tall. That's okay. I don't mind. But I'm gonna make that costume. And a lot of years, and I try to figure out what I'll need, and I have to get all these different things. Last year I did Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. The year before I did the Mandalorian. So you know, a lot of years I'll have to get shoes and foam, and like for Scorpion I had to get chain and leather. And for Eredin, it's really going to be a lot of foam armor. The only part I think I will need to buy is the skull mask. I don't, you know, I may try to vac one if I have a skull mask around. It looks like it'll work. But it seems like it's going to be all foam this year, which is kind of refreshing. A lot, unless I'm missing something big, and I've looked at the costume all the way around, trying to figure out how it all fits together. I don't think I'm gonna have to buy a lot of stuff. It's just I'm gonna have to buy a bunch of foam. I use the EVA foam floor mats. I buy them from Harbor Freight. They're super cheap there. There is better quality foam you can get. Harbor Freight's cheap. I like it. I've used it. It works for me. So what I do when I decide on a costume, I always kind of jot down ideas. I have a Google Docs that I'll jot down Halloween costumes. I'm like, oh, that'd be cool. That'd be neat. And then this year I was looking through the list. Really want to be the Grim Reaper. That was vetoed by my son. He wants to be the Grim Reaper, and he didn't want me to be the Grim Reaper because, let's be honest, I would outshine him because I go all out on these costumes. So I'll be Grim Reaper next year. And the reason I want to be Grim Reaper is that I'm always doing, you know, a costume based on something else, like the Mandalorian, Scorpion. I'm just copying something somebody else has done. And so the Grim Reaper, I wanted to take the idea of the Grim Reaper and then put my own spin on it. So that'll have to be 2023. For 2022, it is Eredin. And I've pulled a bunch of reference photos, kind of looking at, yeah, how does this costume work together? Like, what do I need? What supplies do I need to get? How does it fit together? Are there any kind of tricky aspects of this costume that I need to be aware of? And I've done it in SketchUp before, which is a little tricky because I'm basically sketching in 2D in SketchUp, though it's 3D costume. This year I just did it by hand on paper, making sure I understood everything. I mean, more or less a simple costume as far as with the parts. You've got the big helmet. It looks awesome. It's part skull, helmet, crown. It's awesome. You've got this big cuirass that is actually pretty standard, but it's got like a lot of like kind of like rib type things coming off of it. You've got the pauldrons, and the pauldrons are kind of multifaceted, where you have like one over the shoulder, one higher up, like I think it's the right arm, like has on the pauldron like these like fingers, like spike type things coming off of it. There's a medallion, which I'm gonna have to think about that because I always want what I make to look realistic as possible. You know, so this armor is mostly metal. I'm using foam, so you've got to bridge that gap to where it looks realistic. I don't want it looking like a cartoon or fake. I'm always trying to make it look real. And I've got some tricks that I've used to, you know, make the foam look thinner, like metal should. Out of Curiass, he's got a cape on the one arm, but it's like a short cape. It's really like a arm cape. And then there's some kind of sleeve on the other side. It looks like there's almost padding underneath the Curiass, like around the midsection. I don't really want to create like foam plates under that. I'm thinking I'm just going to try to work that into whatever the like gamma-zone, the underclothes are. Maybe kind of sew some patterns that to make it look like plates. Because I don't, you know, I got to wear this. I want to be comfortable in that. He's got leg armor, knee guards, shin armor, boots. There's like these big gauntlets with spikes. They look awesome. You know, this fancy kind of belt with some leather strips off of that. A lot of spikes on it. But I mean, if you break down these base pieces, they're pretty simple. Well, what is the most important? You know, last year for Scorpion, it was the tabard. Because that yellow tabard, I mean, you wear that yellow tabard, you're Scorpion. Like the rest of it is secondary. For this, man, it is the helmet. That is number one. After that, probably the Curiass, because it just, you know, you need that armor. That thing looks cool. And then it's always kind of like the lower down you go, like you start at the top, the lower down you go, you can kind of cheat more and more because people, you know, they're going to be looking at the helmet, they're going to be looking at the Curiass. They might not look at the shin guards as much. You can cheat on those if you have to, because I'm always working on a deadline. I like the deadline. I like a hard date. I don't always finish, but if I didn't have a hard date, I could work on this thing indefinitely, and I don't want to do that. So the first thing to do is the helmet. I've got foam. Always use kind of these are like the edge pieces. Always use that. to create the base of the helmet. I'm going to cut it to fit my head, glue it, and basically like so. That'll be the base of the helmet. I'll run a strip that goes across top of my head, so that way it won't drop below my face. And that's going to be the base for my helmet. I'll build off of that. With everything I do, I start with lots and lots of paper templates. I'll use a paper template for the helmet to figure out, where it flares down at the neck. How should that fit? How big should it be? Kind of get a real size, like dimension-wise. I've got my reference photos, but sometimes you take those dimensions from there and they don't scale to me. They don't scale right. So I always have lots and lots of paper templates. I can sketch everything, every piece of the costume out in paper. The Curiass, I'm going to make that in paper. I'll tape it together and I kind of wear it, see how it fits around the arm, see how it looks, all the way around. Kind of get it on and off. I'll probably have to split it along the ribs so I can get it off. Probably don't need to split at the top. I think that's going to be big enough to pull over my head. So just little things like that to work out, and I'll wear this paper costume and I'll look at it in the mirror, figure out, this dimension doesn't look right. I need this just doesn't give me enough room for my arm to move if I make it that small. So sometimes I'll deviate from my reference material because again, I have to wear this. I want to be comfortable. I want it to kind of work. I want the range of motion I want. And I really, in the games, his little skull plate comes off. So I'm thinking maybe something with magnets there. And I've got some half-inch maybe magnets. I'd like something smaller, a little more concealed. I might be able to this being foam, I might be able to recess the magnets in the foam. The faceplate, I really want to make that plastic. I can't do that in foam. I'm thinking kids' skull Halloween mask. I may plastic vacuum form that. I could just destroy it, but why destroy it when I can just duplicate it without too much trouble? I mean, I already got the plastic. Plastic gets expensive, but I've got it. And then once I'm dusted off the vacuum former. That's the plan. So now it's just a matter of working through the costume. I think I've detailed 9 costume pieces, and I've kind of made most of them the least important. The least important I've got are the shoes. I can always cheat that. The leg armor next to the least important. Just got a list over here, everything. But for what I've got important is the helmet, the sword. Most times I don't do weapons with these costumes just because people can get a little skittish with weapons, especially some of these characters that have guns. People, they're a little weird about that. But Eredin has this big 4-foot tall sword. I really want to do that. So that is second on my list because I want a weapon. I feel like this dude, you get that helmet, you get that sword. Like the rest of it, don't matter, man. People aren't gonna care. I mean, they will, but you can cheat. After that, the Curiass, that is crucial. The gambeson, the underclothes, those, I mean, it's just everything else can be built off that, strapped off that potentially, maybe Velcro to that. I always, use strapping Velcro. Then you've got the gauntlets. The gauntlets really massive looking. They're spiked, they're ribbed. You've got the gauntlets run right into I guess the gauntlets encompass the gloves, and they're segmented and spiked. And so I'm gonna have to figure out gloves and attach the gauntlets to those gloves and figure out how that coordinates with the base clothes and everything else. But that's the fun part, man. It's a puzzle. You got to figure it out. Let's see. After the gauntlets, you got the pauldrons, because the pauldrons, it looks like they kind of Velcro to the Curiass. You've got capes and sleeves coming off of that. Then you've got the belt, and the belt is very uniform, like little segments. I was thinking, do I do that out of wood, do that out of foam? I like the idea of foam, but the belt is always, that's a pressure point. Foam rips, foam tears, so I may do some kind of nylon webbing and then glue the foam to that, but I don't want the foam to be ripped off easily. So I had to think about that. I'm thinking maybe kind of sandwiching foam front and back so you get a good, nice bond, because you don't want stuff ripping off the costume. Had that happen, not fun. And the belt also has these leather strips, and the leather strips have spikes in it. I mean, it's a very mean, menacing costume. The dude is, I think he is the final boss in I just lost the name. The Big Hunt, the Wild Hunt? Wild Hunt. Eredin is the final boss in the Wild Hunt DLC. So he's got to look mean. I mean, you gotta want to feel good when you beat that boss. After the belt, you've got leg armor, then the shoes. The shoes are really boots. They're segmented. So a lot of times I'll have to buy a shoe for the costume. With this one, I may not have to. I think I can probably take a pair of tennis shoes or maybe another pair of costume shoes and just create these segmented boots over top of them. Maybe create a bottom kind of strap. That's it. That is the costume. Now it's time to get started. I'm going to start on the helmet and create that base and then create a paper template and kind of figure out how it all fits. Now, the skull part is really crucial. I mean, everything builds around that. But before I vacuum from that, I think that's the way I'm going to go. I can figure out, all right, these spikes, this crown, how tall does that need to be in relation to the helmet? How does it, you start figuring it all out. I'm excited. This is going to be fun. It seems a little bit easier than some of the past years. I don't want to discount it yet. I mean, I'll probably be working down to the wire on this costume. I mean, like Scorpion last year, I finished, you know, Scorpion's got the chain and the spike, the kunai. He's got the kunai. Yeah, I was learning all these terms last year doing Scorpion. And I finished that 2 hours before I was leaving the house to go places in that costume. Like, I'm always running down to the wire. This will be a little bit simpler. Maybe it won't be a mad rush. We'll see. It always has been in the past. One nice thing, having done this so many years, is that now I always have, like, previous costumes as a reference. You know, Scorpion had a hood. Well, I've done a hood on a costume before, so they're able to look at that hood and like, all right, what I like about this, what I not like, and transfer those dimensions to the new hood. You know, with helmets, I've done helmets before. Like, I can look at my Mandalorian helmet. How did I create that base? It's kind of the same way, but what I like about that, what I not like about that, do I need to make it a little bit bigger? Things like that. It's just nice to have a reference point instead of starting from scratch every time. So these are the tools of the trade with foam. I mean, you're cutting, got to have a cutting board. You don't want to tear up any surfaces. Metal straight edge that you're cutting straight. A razor blade, I just switched out my blade. These blades should be cutting through that foam like butter. If you were getting kind of these rough cuts like that, switch out your blade. That's what I did. My first cut, I was like, oh man, that is no good. Always dispose of your blades in something like that where you're not going to poke yourself or somebody else. I've gotten the headband. That is all set. So up next, I just want to go across the top so it doesn't slide down my head, down my face. And I'll just cut this one to shape. And then I'll glue it from front to back. And for gluing, I always use contact cement. It works for anything. I've used hot glue before. Doesn't hold a candle to contact cement. And these are just like all these different applicators I have that I've used, you know, to glue different things, you know, because sometimes you need something really thin like that dowel. Sometimes you're covering a bigger area. You can see I've been using that for a while. That covers a little bit bigger area. Sometimes you want to get into like kind of a corner. That works great for that. And I have my little plastic container just taped to the thing. That way I keep everything in one spot. So I do use contact cement to attach the foam to itself. Wear a respirator if using contact cement. It's just good practice. So I'm a little impatient. You know, you should put on, you know, you could do 2 light coats of contact cement on this EVA foam. You can do 1 heavy coat and let it sit for a minute. I get impatient, so I layer it on there, and then I just tape it in place to hold the joints in place. Because I don't want to have to wait. I'm trying to go places, trying to do things. I did find this skull mask I'd vacuum formed, gosh, years ago. This is not the best point. You can see it's got some dents now. This thing's been kicking around the shop for a while. But I still have the original buck. So I might be able to pull the skull from that. I mean, it's a bit smaller than I'd like. I mean, it kind of is like just the exact size of my face. I like it a little bit bigger because Eredin's mask, has the top teeth. There's no chin. I don't want you to see my chin, so I'd love for the top teeth to come a little bit lower. Maybe I wear some kind of balaclava. I don't know. I mean, I could try to enlarge it. It'd be a little tricky because really the place to enlarge it would be right between the nose and the teeth. But that is like it's not very flat, so it'd be very tricky to try to piece that in. I don't know. Now, if you're layering in here, that'd be a little bit easier. I know my Scorpion mask last year, I did enlarge the skull. Like I pie cut it and enlarged it a bunch of different ways. I don't know. It'd be a little tricky. But that's something. I think I do have another. I think my kid has a mask bumping around. I may see if that's a little bit bigger. If it is a little bit bigger, that'd be great. Cause I want it a little bit bigger. But this at least gives me kind of a base of design where I can kind of figure out how I want this whole helmet to be, and then, you know, just a little bit of trimming. But this is, I'm not going to put this on my head because there's wet contact cement, but it goes on my head just like that. It is a perfect fit. I've just tweaked it until it was right. Now, this headband does go right across here on my head, and with Eredin's helmet, it kind of comes down to a peak, and it's kind of like that. So I may have to trim that later, but I figure for now, I'll just make this very simple harness for it and build around it. If I need to trim it out later, I can always trim it out later. But this gives me a nice basis to attach the sides and the dome and kind of figure that out and have a good shape to it. All right, I'm kind of working on a little bit of everything. Like this helmet, you know, it curves around the head. So I'm trying to figure out where it needs to break because it kind of bends up. So I need it to be able to bend up. I also have to remember that I'm going to have a Curiass, which is probably going to raise it up. So the bottom needs to be a little bit shorter than shown. And it's also not all that low in my head. And a lot of times with a character like this, I always like to be taller than I am just because it looks a little more menacing. I can't really raise this whole helmet up because the bottom of the helmet stops at the top row of teeth. So the more I raise it up, the more of my face you see, and I don't want to see any of my face. So I'm gonna figure out how to balance that. You know, maybe I'll just wear some kind of balaclava that comes up to my nose, so that way if the bottom of the teeth are up here, it all kind of blends. I don't know. We'll figure that out as we go. Working on the Curiass a little bit, and with that, I just take a big sheet of paper, and the first thing I do is I just trace out the neck. You can see this neck's a little bit wide. It probably needs to be about this height, maybe not quite as wide, because this kind of come over my head. I don't really want to have to create seams at the top. I will create them at the sides. from there, I just kind of trace around the arms. You can see these arms. It's a little wide because this would really restrict my range of movement. Like you see how much of this crumpling. That's all the movement I have. I would not be able to bend my shoulder, so it really needs to cut back about right there. If I'm just taking some rough passes, I'll probably end up making this whole thing again once I have it a little more fine-tuned. What I do, I'll trace it on one side and the curve, and then I'll cut out the whole thing like that. Cut and trace until it's right. And this whole thing needs to probably be a little bit higher. I probably need the bottom maybe about right in here, which lines up kind of my ribs and start a little bit, just so I have this space here. Otherwise, if I have it down as I cut it, it's just down to my waist. You know, all the portions aren't going to work out. But it is a starting point, and I fine tune it, and eventually, once I get it right, you know, I may tape some pieces to it to reshape the neck. Once all that's right and I'm happy with it, I'll retrace a complete new piece, see how that works as far as range of movement, as far as proportions, height, and to make it modified even again. And that's pretty much how this whole process works, is creating a basis, fine-tuning it, creating a new one, fine-tuning that, before I actually cut out foam. Because it's a lot cheaper to cut out paper than it is out of foam. Alright, check this out, a little bit of trimming. I trimmed the neck, I trimmed the bottom, I trimmed the side. So I've got the range of movement as far as the arms go. Now I'm wearing a sweatshirt, but I don't quite know how much padding my Gamison's going to take up. The kind of sides, they come out a little bit far apart, one of my kind of mid armpits, so I want to come off a little bit right there. The neck, I've trimmed that down. That's looking good. I've got, you know, full range movement in the neck. So that piece is good, and basically what I'm doing, I've got a mirror right over in my shop, so I'm checking that out, looking at how I think it fits, how I think it should fit, and turn it down. So to start the back, basically I'm just going to trace the front onto another sheet, and the neckline to the back is going to be a little higher than the front. This costume, the back does kind of make that same shape. And then I'll tape them together, and I'll kind of wear it, look at it, see how it fits. So this is like a good basis right here. Now I may need to reshape the arms a little bit. Right now it feels good. It may make it a little bit low, but all in all, if I just ran with this, I'd probably be close enough, but I do want to fine tune it and make sure it's whatever I need it to be. Check it out. I've got the front, I've got the back, and now it's just a matter of fine tuning it. Like I'm looking in my mirror, and I see the neck is a little high. I want it a little bit lower, but to do that, I'm going to need to, you know, add some material here to get it hanging lower because it's kind of hanging in its natural way. Now I need to look at the neck and the back. It wants to, it just seems a little bit big. It's one of those things, just little by little, kind of look at one area then the next. I mean, it seems to hit around my arm pretty good. It might be a little bit of a gap right in this area. You know, but I'll look in the mirror. Also, it's good to look in the camera. The camera kind of just gives you a different angle, a different view. But I mean, you can definitely see the basis of what this would be right now. And that's just with, you know, 10 minutes of work, 10 minutes cutting out some paper. Start tracing on there for all the details. You know, Eredin's armor has a bunch of like little kind of filigree type things coming across. You've got these big rib pipe structures going around the armpit coming out to the center. There's kind of like these open spikes right through here. So I'll sketch it on there to get an idea of rough shape and size before I transfer it to the foam and start making all that. So I found a new skull. This was my one I'd vacuum formed. I was going to have to pull another one. But I found this one my son had that is a little bit bigger. Now, the eyes are a little bit more angry looking. The Eredin, that one, eyes look a little sad. I might be able to try to like cut these eyes and maybe kind of angle them and cut them and maybe even cut this and reshape it. I don't know. But if it stays mad, that's okay. It's a bigger mask, and I don't think I'm going to find sad eyes. It just doesn't happen. These eyes, a little bit more neutral, but this is a little bit bigger, and I want it as big as possible just to cover my face, to cover everything. I like the sad look, but you know what? Anger's going to look fine. Nobody's going to know who this costume is except, I don't know, maybe a handful of people. But I like this bigger mask. I'm going to vac it, and I'll just have to, you know, cut and glue some filler pieces in the eyes. Now the nose and the mouth, they have like small little holes, which is great because it'll pull the air out of these recesses, which you need. I'll need a small hole in the eyes because if you fill it completely with no way for air to escape, the plastic just can't get sucked in there. You need it sucked into there. So yeah, I'll vac this. I may vacuum at the same time. This does not fit on my little mini vacuum former, which does not create as good of a pull. So I may get this buck and do them both because my big vacuum former, it's huge and I waste a lot of plastic being so big. So if I can make a couple pulls at one time, I'm obviously going to try to do that. I've been trying to figure out the horns, the crown of this mask. I think I finally got it. This is my prototype right here. It's kind of got the curve to it, got the right height. This was, yeah, I've done a lot of iterations. This was one of the iterations. I started out with the foam thinking, could I do this one piece of foam and cut the foam so that it'd be one solid piece all the way up? It doesn't work because this horn, it tapers. So it's got that taper and there's no way, it'd be very tricky to get that horn. I thought about you know, maybe trying to put this on the belt sander, sand it, because you don't get super sharp edges. Now with this one, I will have to cut the foam and glue it together and try to get very crisp edges. I may have to sand it on the top because that's getting really thin. I don't know if I can get that thin with foam. I may have to get a little bit thicker, but with overall shape, I think that'll work. And it's taken a lot of iterations. I played in the foam, trying to figure out angles, and you know, this was close. The closest I got with the foam, but it still just didn't quite do it. You know, this would have been the front, this peak where my forefinger is. Then look how rounded the back is, and that's not quite accurate. I thought about belt sanding it, but it's a lot of work. And then I'd have this very straight horn that I needed to curve a little bit. So after screwing around with that, I tossed it, and I think this is it. I mean, this looks good. Now, it is that paper. I got to account for the thickness of the foam and angle it, and I don't exactly know how that tip's going to go. I may cut some foam and practice that tip, getting that thin, and see if I can angle 3 pieces with a miter on both sides just to get an idea of how I can do that, because I think I'll probably have to be thicker. But we're close, man. I don't have a lot of progress, just a lot of iterations and concepts, but I finally have a horn concept I'm happy with. The horns it looks like they're slightly different sizes. Some are shorter and taller. I'm going to retain the same basic shape, maybe just trim the bases. And the bases do, it looks like it's almost like kind of a plate that attaches to the helmet. I think I can just cut the foam at an angle on the bottom and kind of fold up the edge as needed and trim it to fit the helmet. I'll figure that out. And, you know, because you can cheat on this, certainly. But I want it to be as close as possible. I mean, these crisp, sharp edges, that's what this thing needs to be. So I want to get as close as possible. Because if you know, the problem with foam, you can kind of tell when things are foam built because you get these rounded, soft edges, and you need that extra bit of time to get nice, sharp, crisp edges so it looks a little more realistic. Because metal does not have that rounded kind of edge. Metal is very crisp, very sharp edges, and that's what I wanted to create. It's time to start building one of these horns and see if my concept works. So what I do, I need to cut 10 of these. I'm going to cut them all from the same template. I just tape it down, trace with the Sharpie, and that gives me a great line on where to cut. And especially when I need to make 10 of these, that makes it very simple.